Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar event that Wolf Theiss is very proud to host, marking the rollout of our 9th edition of our Renewable Energy Guide, as we call it, the official name being the Generating Electricity from Renewable Sources in Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe. We are scheduled to start now. It's 3:01 p.m. CET. We are going to wait maybe 1 or 2 minutes because we are expecting more folks to dial in here. While we're waiting, I will maybe outline some technical aspects. As you saw from the agenda, we're going to be covering a number of 12 countries in today's webinar, and we're going to try and strictly adhere to the timeline because we recognize some folks might be coming into this presentation interested only in certain group presentations. So we're going to try and stick to the agenda as much as possible, and that's going to be my job as the moderator to ensure that we adhere to that as closely as possible. We have set aside in the last 20 minutes a period that could be used or can be used as Q&A. We won't have time during the actual country presentations to take questions, but if you have questions in particular for a particular country or speaker, please feel free to send those to me by the chat box, Brian Jardine, and we'll endeavor to respond to those. If we don't have time in the last 20 minutes, either because we run out of time or some of the speakers may need to sign off early, we will again endeavor to respond to all the questions through follow-up email if necessary. And we have your contact details, so if you just we'll see who's asking the question and be in a position to respond to those. We are going to start the event here, I think, now. We have a number of folks that have already joined, and others will, as I said, be joining. Some may only be coming in for certain portions of the agenda. So I want to thank, first of all of the participants who will be joining us today. Some of you may have participated in our similar webinar event in 2020, which marked the rollout of our 8th guide. We've been publishing this Regional Renewable Energy Guide since 2010, back when the first sort of targets were set in 2009 by the EU with the ambitious future date of 2020 to achieve many targets in our countries. Obviously, 2020 now in the rearview mirror, and we're looking ahead to 2030. And as many of you know, 2030 has the European Green Deal has established a number of ambitious targets for countries that previously may have slowed down their incentivizing of renewable energy. For example, in Romania, where I'm practicing, we saw a suspension of the tradable green certificates support scheme in 2016, in part because there was a feeling that the national targets had already been achieved. But we're seeing now with more ambitious targets, looking ahead to 2030, a lot more activity, frankly, taking place in our part of the world, and a lot of exciting developments that we're going to be hearing about from my colleagues who have joined us on the call here today. I'm very honored to have a number of presenters who will be speaking to the countries as identified on this agenda. These are folks who have worked extensively in the renewable energy space over the last years in their own countries and even on cross-border deals. They will highlight what really are some of the significant changes that we've seen in the legislation over the last couple of years since the 2020 guide, but perhaps more interestingly for the participants to talk about trends and developments in renewables in their countries and what sort of prognosis they have for the future, looking ahead again to 2030. Obviously, recent events have also significantly impacted the renewable energy sector. I'm speaking, of course, of the war in Ukraine. When we started publishing or drafting and updating the chapters of our guide, this is a lengthy process, as you can imagine. We started at the end of last year, but I think that the situation in Ukraine, which commenced at the end of February in 2022, will only accelerate the movement towards renewables in our part of the world. I think the issues about energy security and continued dependency and vulnerability with respect to imported Russian gas has become heightened because of the circumstances in the more recent past. I know many experts in this field were talking about using gas as a transition technology as we move from dirty coal to renewables. But I think, again, with the heavy dependence of our region on imported Russian gas, this underscores the need to almost generationally leapfrog, if you will, directly to renewables, which now creates a lot of investor incentive around storage of energy. We have a number of projects, for example, in Romania, where we're looking at solutions for storing renewable energy. And I think that's going to be an exciting development that a number of our speakers will also touch on in today's discussion. So again, I want to thank you all for your participation. And I'm going to be following, as I said at the outset, the time. So I've even got two watches on here. I'm not sure if one's more accurate than the other, but I'm going to try and stick to this. And I've asked the speakers as well to endeavor to stick to the time frames that we've outlined in this agenda. Again, I encourage any of the participants, if you have questions, we may not be able to get to them today in the course of the actual presentation, but we would encourage you to send those questions to us, and we'll look to get those taken care of. So I'm going to kick off here now with those introductory remarks, and I'd like to introduce my partner, Sasha Jovasic, who's sitting in our Croatian office. Sasha Jovasic, would you please perhaps tell us a bit about yourself? And you're kind enough to be pinch hitting today, as we say in American baseball, for Bosnia as well. So you'll be covering that. So I would like to turn the floor over to Sasha. Sasha is a very experienced practitioner in the renewable sector. He's a partner with whom I've had the pleasure of working on a number of transactions. And so with no further ado, Sasha, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Sasha, I think you're on mute.
The most commonly said sentence in the past few years, you are on mute. Not being on mute anymore. Thank you, Brian, for the very kind introduction. My name is Sasha Jovicic. I'm a partner with the project's infrastructure and energy team in Zagreb, Croatia. As Brian said, my role here today is twofold. I'm going to speak to you a little bit about Croatian market, and then for the second part of my presentation, also a little bit about the Bosnian market, stepping in for the Bosnian colleagues. So Croatian market, just to give you a little bit of a background, has been very active over the past couple of years. Very active in meeting the renewable energy goals as set out by the European legislation. Currently, renewable energy sources account for 28% in the total consumption as of last year, and we are moving forward to reaching 36.8%. That should be the total consumption share in 2030. How we intend to do this is by high introduction of renewable energy sources. Croatia has historically relied a lot on the hydro potential, which it will not do anymore because a lot of the water areas have been now protected and put under conservation. So logically, we are moving to other sources. These are predominantly wind and solar. Until now, we have installed, as of last year, some 2 gigawatts of capacity in wind and some 400 megawatts of capacity in solar. We intend to increase this, and some projections outline that we will need an additional 2.5 gigawatts of new capacity by 2030. This effectively means that Croatia will have to double everything it has done until now in the next 8 years. The question first, of course, is whether there is interest to do this, and the answer is without a doubt, yes. At this point, we have 6.5 gigawatts of projects of production capacity, generation capacities declared, which is basically a very high competition in a fairly, let's say, small Croatian market. The question is, of course, there are many questions that this raises. The first question, obviously, is the question of transmission and can we do it? The main problem here being, obviously, the fact that a large part of this generation capacity will be in the Croatian south because of the favorable conditions, both in terms of wind and solar, which then again raises the question of the transmission capacity. The transmission capacity will have to be increased, making a bigger connection between the south of the land and the north of the land to transmit all of this generated electricity. And this will certainly create a lot of room for investments, not only in the generation capacity that we are always talking about, but also then in the transmission capacity. What this means, some projections are that there is a need for at least 900 million euros of investments into the transmission capacity, and then also around 200 million euros investment in the distribution capacity, basically being the difference between the high voltage and the low voltage networks. What we are seeing here as a result is an intensified activity in basically increasing and collecting finance for the deployment of these initiatives, but also an increased interest into other aspects of grid stability or ways how to increase grid stability, such as energy efficiencies, smart grids, energy storage, and other various aspects of how to deal with this. In other aspects outside this solar and wind, we also see a lot of interest into geothermal energy. There has been an expression of interest and basically a high activity of the Croatian government to promote investments into geothermal. So this has been a fairly active sector in the past period. And what we also see is, let's say, some exploration activities or preliminary activities, how to explore offshore wind. When we talk about offshore wind, I think that in Croatia we are still a bit out of actual deployment, actual development of projects, but this is something that is actively being pursued in Croatia. In terms of legislation, what we are seeing after a long time, many of you who have read our earlier editions of the RES guide know that the Croatia has been essentially incentivizing its renewable energy production through feed-in tariffs, and this has changed recently. By the changes of legislation in 2020, there was a shift from this feed-in tariff system to a market premium system. Market premium being a contract for difference. I think that a lot of the other colleagues who are here on the call will also testify that there is a positive movement towards contracts for difference in most of our jurisdictions. The contracts for difference tender has been launched until now only for the small scale generation capacities, and it is currently underway for large capacities. Actually, only a few days ago, there was a launch of the tender for the expression of interest. So we are very, very keen to see how the tender, which was, I have to say, expected for a very, very long time. I think for almost a year and a half, we were waiting for the tender to be launched due to the pre-required approval of the European Commission. Now we have the tender, now it's being launched, and now I think that everybody in the market is interested to see how it will turn out, especially considering the very high volatility of the market and the surging electricity prices, which is certainly a new element in relation to what we had at the table when the system was designed. So I think that this is a large movement in the Croatian market. What we also have in the Croatian market is basically a completely new, two completely new acts, a large redraft of the Renewable Energy Act, and equally large redraft, basically, or completely new law of the Electricity Market Act. This has introduced a number of new concepts into Croatian law. Try to develop some of the existing concepts. I think that what we are seeing now, most importantly, are the concepts of storage operators, the concepts of aggregators, the concepts of energy communities and the prosumers. And I think that all of this is going to slowly find its way into the market. One of the, I would say, expected consequences of all of these regulatory developments is the fact that a large number of the market players, of the industry stakeholders, are trailing a little bit in terms of keeping up the pace with the market developments. Most importantly, I think we have seen that a substantial number of developments that these new acts have brought have slowed down, especially the governmental stakeholders, in terms of grid connection. We are seeing a lot of issues here with the existing requests for grid connections and the new requests for grid connections being slowed down. We are also seeing a slowdown in the energy impact assessment approvals. So these are basically, I think, at this point, the two most important external factors that are preventing the full deployment of renewable energy projects in Croatia. There are some others, as I already mentioned, the question of the grid stability and the possibility of the grid locally to take this in. But I think that this is something that will have to be dealt with in the upcoming period. What we see for the future, I think that the future will bring many interesting developments and many legal developments, but also industry developments into the market. What we expect to see in the upcoming period is certainly a large rise in the interest for power purchase agreements, both commercial and corporate power purchase agreements. We did not have that high number of commercial power PPAs until now. We did not have a single corporate PPA until now. There is some indication that we might see the Croatian first corporate PPA being deployed fairly soon, and with the feed-in tariffs basically being phased out with the first projects which were deployed in 2010, 11, 12 for a 14-year term will slowly start to expire. We think that these projects will seek, let's say, a new wind through PPAs. What we also see, what's being highly developed or let's say promoted by the Croatian government, I think also other governments in the region, is the deployment of hydrogen as basically in two folds. First, as a energy storage option, and the second is as basically a replacement for or basically a way to decarbonize traffic, especially heavy traffic. This is something that's being actively promoted by the Croatian government, with the hydrogen strategy being deployed last year. And basically a lot of energy, a lot of focus, and a lot of, let's say, trust being put into hydrogen to get us where we want to be in terms of decarbonization. Many other things also being on the plate, as Brian already mentioned, storage being one of them, an interest in smart grids being the second one, and additionally some other niche, let's say, products, at least for Croatia. Now we have the first virtual power plant being deployed and operational in the Croatian market. So quite a dynamic market. Finally, speaking of Croatia, I think that what I think is really interesting is that we are seeing a high interest, of course, from the traditional market players into investments, but we also see a lot of interest from the industry in terms of greening their footprint, their operations, but also then from the local government units and regional government units. And I think one of the most important and one of the things where we are most involved is the energy sustainability of islands. Croatian islands are many. There are tourist destinations that are aiming to basically brand themselves as green destinations. We are very proud to be a part of a project which is aimed, financed by the European Commission, which is aimed at promoting energy sustainability of islands in various ways. So in Croatia, there are so many different projects, including electric boats, solar power plants, crowdfunding of let's say, locally owned projects. So I think that this interest is going to be even more. So we are going to see even more of this in the upcoming period, and I think this also creates a very interesting niche, also on a very, very small micro local level. And that's it for Croatia, which makes me basically just able to slowly transition to Bosnia. In Bosnia, we also have very interesting developments going on. The state of the market there is a little bit, let's say, less developed in terms of both the market and the regulations. What we can see from the Renewable Energy Action Plan, there were certain targets set for 2020. It still hasn't been conclusively established whether these goals have been met. And essentially, at this point, the local the Bosnian government is working on setting up new goals for 2030. For those of you who have been following the situations in Bosnia, you are aware that Bosnia has basically two entities: the Federation of the Federation and the Republic of Srpska. The goals are being set for the entire country. At this point, there has been a legislative development only in the Republic of Srpska, who has adopted a new Renewable Energy Act only very early this year. This new act, similarly to Croatia, has introduced a number of new concepts, including the energy communities and the prosumers. What we see as an interesting development is that after a certain, let's say, a bit of a longer period, the Republic of Srpska has started to again incentivize wind production capacities. So this is obviously a new development. And the other let's say, more substantial new development is the fact that the new act also introduced a shift from the feed-in tariffs to a market premium system. The bylaws for the new Renewable Market Act in the Republika Srpska have not yet been adopted. There is an indication that this may happen by in the third quarter of 2022. Of course, this being an election year, the process may be a little bit extended, as usually things work in election years, but there is a high expectation that things will develop in a positive direction by the end of this year. What we have also learned through our discussions with the local stakeholders is that the federation, the government in the federation, the other part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, is also working on developing its, let's say, its own revised regulatory framework. There have reportedly been joint task forces working on the market to basically create a harmonized regulatory framework. So we expect that the laws that will be passed in the federation part of the Bosnia and Herzegovina will correspond in the most part to the law that has been passed in the Republika Srpska, which most importantly means also transition to the market premium scheme, which then should be deployed after the passing of the necessary bylaws. But we expect that during some time in 2023, there should be some first market premium tenders, both in the Republic of Srpska and the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Apart from that, problems very similar as in Croatia, the grid connection being perhaps the most important issue in Bosnia. So with that being said, as Brian said, we will be taking questions after the webinar. I'm happy to take questions to respond to any questions that you may have, either in relation to Croatia or to coordinate with our colleagues from Bosnia. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Sasha, for that presentation. So sort of helicopter view over Croatia and Bosnia. It was, I think, very informative. We indeed have at least one question on Croatia, which we'll share with you, and we would ask if you could provide the response to the gentleman that tabled the question. We're now going to shift. We're pretty much on schedule. I thank you for that also, Sasha, adhering to our very tight agenda, although I'm going to leave an extra 2 minutes for my next speaker, so you've got actually can go a little bit over, Angelica. My next speaker from our office in Serbia is Angelica Todorovic, and I'm going to ask Angelica, for many of you who participated in our last webinar we had 2 years ago, will recognize her. She is our partner who's very focused on renewable energy projects and has a very impressive list of transactions that she's worked on in the space, and we're very honored to have her and thank her for her contributions to the guide, and she's going to enlighten us about the recent developments and prognosis for Serbia. Angelica.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you to Sasha, who has been very generous and gave me an extra 2 minutes. I'm always very happy to participate in these events and to compare and contrast where our various markets are across Western Balkans. As Brian said, my name is Angelica Todorovic. I'm a partner with Wolf Theiss in Belgrade. I specialize in energy and infrastructure, project finance, and development. My expertise is mostly in wind projects, so these are the darlings of the Serbian market, but I'm actually very proud of my work in more niche sectors, at least in my market, such as biomass, where Serbia really has immense potential, but also our one and only waste-to-energy public-private partnership project. Apart from advisory work, I regularly assist clients, foreigners in Serbia who are trading electricity on our local power exchange. And I also assist companies from various industries on their ESG compliance and policies. So I will be your guide today through the Serbian market, and we have still very limited time, I would say, considering just how much ground we have to cover. If you have done your homework and have read on the Serbian chapter of the Renewable Energy Guide that we just launched, you will know there is a lot of ground to cover. So essentially, we have changed the entire legal framework on renewables. So I'm going to give you a benefit of a doubt and assume that you have done some of your homework. So I'm just going to give you the highlights and some spotlights of the market. Clearly, what we will be discussing today is auctions, and this is our main focus when the Serbian market is concerned. this might be old news to some markets, and you've heard from Sasha, many countries in the region, Bosnia, we've seen Republic of Srpska already including also the same mechanisms. But Serbia, for the first time, included this competitive incentive system into its legislation, and these are auction-based premiums. So for our market, it's quite a disruption, as we have for, I would say, 10-ish years been a feed-in tariff market. So we are already seeing a lot of interest from investors for securing land rights, obviously. But I would say that compared to a lot of countries in the region, a lot of land in Serbia is still untapped. So we are seeing a lot of interest in securing land rights and in development of particularly wind projects. The new model PPA has actually only recently been revealed and enacted. It is, again, same as previously, a regulated document, a model document with very limited changes allowed. Essentially, what you should know is that this is a contract for difference, and it has a very attractive 15-year tenor. The first question I usually get from both investors and lenders alike is, well, when are these auctions happening? And this is where we run into a couple of issues. Currently, we have a very dynamic discussion. We would say quite embarrassingly, it's happening over media between our Ministry of Energy and the remaining regulators, which are the transmission system operator and the energy agency, as well as the distribution system operator. As you can expect, the issues that they are discussing is how much our grid can handle so quickly. The ministry, on the one hand, is under a lot of pressure from the European community, from the EU authorities to enact this legislation. It was a huge milestone achieving this. But on the other hand, the regulators who are in practice dealing with grid maintenance and having to have a stable energy system, which we saw last winter not very stable, are warning that this very quick introduction of auctions is actually going to jeopardize our energy system. What we are currently looking at is a first auction that should take place in the fourth quarter of this year, and I'd say this very lightly because these dates keep being postponed. The discussion is still ongoing, but what we are hoping for is to see a first auction by end of this year still. The second question I get from investors usually is, well, who can participate in these auctions? What kind of plans should I have? For this, please look at our Renewable Energy Guide, because there are certain milestones, thresholds that have limitations that exist when certain facilities are in question. But generally, any type of renewable energy, as it is defined plant, is allowed to participate, but not all quotas at the moment have been determined. Very importantly, and an interesting news for us in the wind sector, is that the government has established and enacted a new quota for wind. This is 400 megawatt. So news now is that we have this new quota that should be distributed in Serbia in these auctions, up to 400 megawatt for wind. For some countries, this might not be that much, but considering that in Serbia we currently have 400 megawatt of installed total wind power, this should double that. So for us, it's quite substantial. A more specific question, which I'm asked actually, and I think this one is critical for investors, which is, what stage does my project have to be in order for me to qualify for these auctions? Do I have to have a constructed power plant? What does ready to build mean? What do I have to have in my hands in order to participate at an auction? This was unclear and highly debated for a long time during the discussions of the legislation. But essentially, we have the response for you now, which is you need to have an energy permit and location conditions. Both the energy permit and the location conditions are documents and permits that you obtain prior to the construction permit. So you do not need to have a construction permit in order to participate in the auction. This is under the law, but I emphasize that rules for certain auctions might stipulate differently and might require a higher level of completion of a project. Generally, an energy permit and location conditions are required. A third condition is a financial one, obviously. So you will need to have a financial instrument in order to participate in an auction in Serbia. This is a financial instrument that will be determined per auction. So I will not be able to help you so much in what amounts we are looking for. But if you, the first financial instrument, of course, is for the bid. And then if you enter into this contract for difference for the 15-year tenor period, you will actually need to maintain a financial instrument throughout the contract. This is important because this is either a bank guarantee issued by a Serbian bank or it's a monetary deposit into a Serbian bank account, which in practice is very important for investors to know. Finally, just to wrap up on the auctions, I personally think that it's a very interesting time in the market because everyone is focusing on this new legislation and how to get to the auctions. But what we need to understand with this, when the Serbian market is concerned, is that the entirety of the feed-in tariff package that was in the past 10-ish, I say, years, granted to various investors. These projects, some of them have not yet been constructed to completion. So, and these projects have locked their feed-in tariff at the time they have entered into the PPA. So we currently have a very interesting mix on the market where we have projects that we are expecting to come into the mix, but we have almost all of the projects that were afforded incentives in the past period. A lot of them have merely started, or maybe even have not yet started, the 12-year tenor on their feed-in tariff PPA, and they've locked the feed-in tariff. So we have a lot of interest in actually acquisition of these projects that are still under the old legislation. I'm saying they are subject to the old legislation because, very interestingly, we do have a stabilization clause in our law that allows projects that have acquired incentives under a certain earlier legislative package to actually still be under the earlier law, and the new laws do not apply in that regard to these new projects. Very interested to see how these old players and new players will commingle in the market. I know that in neighboring markets we've already had these situations, and I'm hoping that we will learn a bit from those. In my remaining 2 minutes, I will just briefly touch on some of the other topics that I believe are quite interesting and that have garnered quite a bit of attention based on this new package. The first one clearly is the topic of prosumers. Finally, we have this concept. It was one of the more highly debated concepts, and one where we have had quite a lot of involvement from the distribution system operator, the transmission system operator, and just how this concept is supposed to work in the Serbian market. However, we currently do have it in the law. We are currently in development of various bylaws, but we do have quite a lot of interest from especially industries throughout Serbia who are in traditionally more dirty sectors, who are coming to us saying, we have a rooftop, now what? So we are currently seeing a lot of partnering up between industry players from various sectors, with traditional energy generators, as well as manufacturers of rooftop tech. So this is something that is quite dynamic in the market we have today. And one more thing that often goes unmentioned is guarantees of origin. Serbia is the first country throughout Western Balkans that actually has an EU regulation level guarantee of origin. These have proven to be quite popular on the market because they allow local companies to meet their ESG goals, to have something substantial under their ESG policies. And an interesting example we have is a local bank, for example, who now has who has purchased this guarantee of origin, and who claims that all of its offices throughout Serbia, their entire car fleet, is now under renewable energy. So basically, these guarantees of origin, which might be a bit disregarded or have different, there's a different level of appetite in other countries, have really picked up in Serbia. So quite a lot of other topics that I would love to cover with you, but I don't have that much time today. I look forward to your questions in the Q&A later, and I'm handing it over to Brian.
Thank you so much, Angelica, for that very comprehensive overview, and appreciate that there's many other topics that could be addressed, but I appreciate you adhering to the agenda here, since our next speaker is from a different region. Now we're moving from the Western Balkans into what we've called the Central region, and I'm very pleased to introduce my partner, Kurt Retter, who will be presenting today recent developments and sort of prognosis for Austria. Kurt.
Thanks, Brian, for the introduction. By the way of background, I've been a partner now for more than 20 years in the firm, and I'm heading the regulatory practice here in Vienna and the regulatory practice group firm-wide. And the regulatory group as such is very much involved in various kinds of angles to the energy sector. Basically, energy regulatory, obviously, then also permitting and construction, that would be also an angle there, and pricing issues, as well as project financing transactions or corporate transactions. So we're looking at different angles from different perspectives with a focus, obviously, on energy regulatory. I have to apologize that Harald Straberger, who is on my team, unfortunately is caught in an oral hearing at an authority and couldn't make it because they wanted to have him stay with them. So I'm happy to chip in here and present to you some of the basic experiences and discussions we had with various key stakeholders over the past few weeks in the Austrian renewable energy market, and present to you some of the trends that we are observing on the basis of those discussions that we had with various key stakeholders. So let me start off with the first trend, which is basically a delay in the finalization of the new subsidy framework. While we had in the last year, in July, a new framework for the expansion of renewable energy in Austria, new statutory framework, there is still some more guidance missing there, and developers are basically waiting for the government to issue long overdue regulations, basically detailing the new subsidy schemes under the Austrian Renewable Energy Expansion Act. And those have been now delayed for several months, and there is, of course, a backlog basically now in renewable energy projects pending that new subsidy framework to be specified in those new regulations. So that's first trend. Second trend that we spotted is there is a land rush in that situation now. So in view of the upcoming expansion in the renewable energy market, developers seem to be increasing their efforts to secure land plots for their development pipeline in advance. The medium-term expectation is basically that rooftop solar will play an increasingly important role, because there likely will be a shortage of land plots for greenfield solar PV, in particular on arable land. So this land rush basically very much influences what's going to happen over the next few months and years, basically. One trend which can be seen overall in many parts of Europe is that the grid expansion basically is behind target, unfortunately. So the grid expansion and modernization needed in the electricity grid to accommodate the rapid deployment of renewable energy plants is behind target. And as a result, businesses and developers have turned to expanding the lower grid levels on their own initiative by building transformer stations and grid connections to existing high voltage transmission lines. Another trend which is politically disturbing and creates a lot of fuss on the overall level on political level in Austria is that, in contrast to the EU targets and the Austrian federal government strategy to expand renewable energy production, the Austrian regional governments had to take another position and to suspend the expansion of certain asset classes, particularly wind farms, for political reasons, basically. So especially municipalities on a local level and citizens regularly oppose the construction of new wind farms in their vicinities. And the developers are facing the challenge of actively having to sway the public opinion, the public perception, in favor of planned wind projects. Even small groups of locals opposing a project can significantly hamper progress in projects, both in the permitting and the construction stage. Overall, this not in my backyard kind of attitude leads to a discrepancy between the EU targets and local progress on achieving them. So we've also seen one case only this year where we are facing for one of our huge clients who wants to have a solar PV facility, where the land is even with very absurd arguments delaying the permits. And this is, in this very case, it's an interesting one because it's a federally owned large company, which basically wants to have a permission for under nature conservation laws from an Austrian province. So and this is a very good example of how those things work here, that there is really something which is hard to resolve because political stances on the local level basically just run against the federal aims of energy policy. So the next trend, the fifth one now on the list, would be that we're still facing quite lengthy permitting procedures. That's what developers also keep telling us, and what we obviously see each and every day, especially, for instance, in that case that I was just referring to, where we're now already at the third instance, which is the highest administrative court in Austria. And permitting procedures for renewable energy projects can take several years, like, for instance, some 3 years in the case that I was just referring to. And obviously, this is perceived as way too long by developers. So developers remain skeptical despite EU proposals for accelerating permitting procedures, because after all, like environmental laws in Austria, in most cases go back to EU proceedings like the environmental impact assessments, which per se, of course, run counter to the aim of efficiently and quickly building up RES capacities. Furthermore, what we see is that competent authorities are time and again seen by our clients as overly complicated in assessing innovative projects, even if they are extensions of plants already in operation, such as hybrid power systems, such as wind coupled with solar PV or battery storage. So also that is something somehow mentioned by our clients and also seen by us, frankly spoken, in the market. Moreover, there is one specificity where permits pertain to a very specific turbine type and model in Austria, instead of comparably abstract parameters being relevant, which would be preferable, like hub height or rotor diameter or electrical parameters and installed capacity. This circumstance, in turn, severely limits developers in their ability to react to changes in the market environment post-permitting, and also puts them at a significant disadvantage when negotiating with turbine manufacturers. So overall, last trend would be that there is, due to political circumstances on the global level, rising development costs and supply chain constraints. So this also is seen as a critical issue these days. And summarizing, taking all of these points, of course, we had the impression when we prepared for presenting our trends here for Austria, there is some sort of pessimistic view taken by some in our client base that the target of achieving 100 renewable electricity generation by 2030 set by the federal government can really be achieved. Nevertheless, we keep fingers crossed, of course, and look forward to the next years to come in that respect. And I'm happy to have kept my time, Brian, as far as I can see on my clock here.
Perfect, Kurt, and thanks very much. That was a very obviously well presented. You covered those very methodical and very interesting to hear, sort of the disconnect there between the ambitious goals and the, sort of boots on the ground reality in some instances. But thank you for that overview, and thank you to Harold, who I know worked very hard on the chapter and on this, and unfortunately was not here. But certainly, if there are questions, as mentioned earlier, sorry, we're having a weather alert here in Bucharest. I'll turn it off. Okay, sorry about that. We're having thunderstorms, so that's that's real renewable energy out there just flashing away. But yeah, so we will, if there are any questions from the audience, we'll, for Austria, certainly Kurt and or Harold be happy to respond. I'm going to switch over now to my colleague Barbara Malamankova, who is in our Prague office. She will be giving a presentation today on recent developments and trends in the Czech renewable market. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Brian. Thank you for the floor. Welcome to the Czech part of the webinar. As Brian said, my name is Barbara Malamankova, and I'm the head of Wolf Theiss Construction Practice, and I am also part of the Project Energy Group. With my colleagues, we support our clients with a wide range of issues, including energy licensing matters, projects, due diligence, acquisition, development, construction, and recently we also advise on taxonomy issues and ESG compliance as well, basically what the clients ask. I will now use my 10 minutes to tell you about some renewable-related recent highlights from the Czech Republic. There has been quite a lot since our last issue of the RES Guide in 2016. In particular, there has been two major legislative changes. One is the amendment of the Czech Renewable Promotion Act, which covers all the subsidy framework and how we want to reach the EU targets in the Czech Republic. And other one, which is unfortunately still pending, is the new Energy Act. This is the major act we have in the whole energy area. It governs the TCO, the distribution networks, and everything. And so we're expecting like very major changes here this year or early next year, which will also like promote the goals and help us to be ready for the Fit 55 and to lower the carbon footprint. So these are the like most legislative changes. If I jump into the Renewable Promotion Act, there are two topics which I would like to cover here. One refers to the past, and this is the tackling the overcompensation issue for the old project, and one is coming into the future and basically introduces new subsidy frameworks. So how the new installations starting now from the 2022 could obtain subsidies and also make themselves profitable. So if I go to the overcompensation issue, this might be of an interest rather to a potential investor of existing installation. The overcompensation issue is basically a long story which goes back to the first solar boom here in the Czech Republic of 2006 until the 2015, and it was caused by very favorable conditions for the new renewable sources, which were mostly payout in 2008 to 11. There used to be a very high tariff prices or green bonuses, and then the prices of new installation dropped quickly, and there was a quite huge profits on part of the the owners of these plants, which basically in the Czech Republic led to not very nice mood among the public because of the public spending was so high. And after like very lengthy discussions, now the amendment provides for a legal framework which will introduce so-called inquiry into the inadequacy of the support for the power plants. And it seems that with this inquiries, there will be a last solution, and the ministry in the Czech Republic will set out if there is a adequate support or not, and based on this results we'll probably adopt measures whether to shorten the subsidy payout to the existing projects or not. So this is rather something which is interesting to someone who might consider investing into the existing project. For the new project, we have introduced new types of support, which will be the auction bonuses for the Czech Republic. It's a new framework. We have never had this subsidy before, and basically it's a surcharge on the market price of electricity collected for each kilowatt produced due to the lifetime of a plant. The lifetime is basically set out by the applicable regulations, but we expect it to be around 20 or 25 years, so the investor can calculate their costs and can set out the prices. The green bonuses will be kept. What we will not have anymore for a new installation will be the feed-in tariff. So this is the matter of a past. So unfortunately, the new producer will not obtain this bonus, but hopefully even the newly introduced scheme will encourage enough investors to set up enough new installation to reach the 2030 goals. The green bonuses will be granted automatically to producers of installation which are less than 1 megawatts. The auction bonuses are intended for larger installation, and for power plants, it seems currently that not all type of renewable sources will be able to obtain the auction bonuses. Unfortunately, the discussions are still ongoing that the solar plants will be disqualified from the auction, and this is not decided yet. However, the ministry is arguing that if the auction bonuses will be available to solar plants, there will be a risk of not fulfilling the promise to install 100,000 new photovoltaic plants on the roofs by the 2025. So it seems a bit contradictory, but rather it seems that the support will go into the consumers, proactive consumers, to build small rooftops rather than to large installation. Regardless of any support from our clients, we often receive queries regarding corporate PPAs structure, and this is a new topic in the Czech Republic. So it seems to be developing rather quickly, and we also hear from a very large clients such as Skoda car manufacturer or the retailer Bila, who have instructed producers of renewables to build power plants on their premises. So it seems that in the Czech Republic, this will be quite a big trend. The corporate PPAs and the cooperation between large industrial players, logistic players, and the the energy producers from renewables to keep up the ECG ranking and also to limit the footprints of the individual players. Then we also see many issues similar to Austria, like the decentralization of production and the shortage of capacities in the firm providing the assembly and also the panels or the turbines. And these are rather the market developments, and we hope to overcome them with some local production or improvement of the logistics. Brian?
Thank you so much,
It
Barbara.
seems that I'm
right
very sharp on 16, so I will not continue.
Well, thank you for that overview, Barbara. That was very interesting indeed. And interesting to hear what's happening with this Energy Act that we've all been waiting for, and some of the, overcompensation that we're aware of happened in the early days in the Czech Republic. I'm going to switch gears now to Slovenia. My colleague Clement, I'm going to ask Clement to introduce himself and talk a bit about what he's seeing in the Slovenian market.
Thank you, Brian. My name is Clement Radosavljevic. I'm a partner in Wolf Theiss Ljubljana office. I deal mainly with energy regulatory matters, but I also deal with certain corporate law, M&A aspects of transaction, also projects in this respect. I'll be presenting the current status of the market in Slovenia with certain last legal developments, and actually maybe just a short overview of also how the renewable energy, what's the status of it in Slovenia. So basically, the main source of electricity from the renewable sources in Slovenia is solar power plants. This is a result of a successful support scheme which has been introduced already in 2009. Secondly, then there's hydropower, which again has been successfully implemented in the past years. The current agenda has it that there will be no new hydropower plants due to the negative impacts on the nature, but to renew the current structure, to increase its capacity, efficiency, and so on. So basically no new barriers on the waterways, but actual improvement of the current hydropower plants. And third source is the wind energy power plants. This is something that has been very contentious in the quite recent and further past years. There have been a lot of environmental concerns. There have been certain groups which have been advocating against wind energy power plants. There have been bird protection groups. So it has been a contentious matter so far. The potential has not developed yet. There are a few single power plants installed, but nothing large scale. There has been also concern about where are the suitable wind conditions. Some concerns also about the noise pollution. And the current plan is to have this regulated by legislation, especially in relation to noise pollution, to have this regulated in a way to, let's say, open up a bit of a route also for wind energy. Finally, one of the topics is also the sustainable wood biomass utilization. Some of you probably know Slovenia is one of the countries which has the largest forest areas in comparison to its whole area. So there's a huge potential here, but it hasn't been realized yet. So there are also thoughts at the policy or political levels how to additionally stimulate this to actually have a larger share of utilization of sustainable wood biomass. Coming to the actual legal status about the renewable support. There have been a lot of changes in Slovenian legislation in the recent years. The basic premise of the support is there are two types of support. One is the guaranteed purchase. The other one is the offsetting the difference between the cost of generation and the price of the sale. Support is granted in a public tender procedure. This has been changed a few years ago. Before there was no public tender procedure required. And there has been also a change throughout the years, reducing the rated power, currently now stated at less than 10 megawatts, to be eligible for the support. Another important change, already introduced quite some years ago is that in Slovenia, there is no requirement for a license to generate renewable electricity. Now, this results in the following. Currently, there is about 21% share of renewable electricity in the final energy consumption. The goal is to achieve a 27% share in the near future and have a complete climate neutrality by 2050. Just to sum up now the key changes to the renewable energy sources support scheme. So we have in the past years the Slovenian legislation has reduced units power limit to get the guaranteed purchase. There have been obligatory contributions that need to be made by end consumers for the renewable energy sources. There have been a specific scheme, has been a court debate and a court decision, constitutional court decision with respect to the compensation for users of real property on which the actual energy infrastructure is under construction. The fines for a violation of a mandatory share of renewable fuels in sales have been also increased recently. And the most recently, there have been new acts introduced on energy efficiency and use of renewable energy sources. In particular, in November 2020, there was a new Energy Efficiency Act introduced, which transposed Directive 2012/27. In particular, it regulates the energy efficiency, general measures to promote energy efficiency, measures to increase energy efficiency, and requirements for products and ensuring energy efficiency of buildings. Another new law has been introduced in August 2021. This is the new Renewable Energy Act, which transposed Directive 2018/2001, which regulates the implementation of state and municipal policies on using renewable energy sources. It sets binding targets for the share of energy from renewable sources in the gross final consumption in Slovenia. The plan, of course, is also that certain important new changes are introduced in the current structure of Renewable Energy Support Scheme. The new National Energy and Climate Plan, it's 2020, not that new anymore, but still relatively new for Slovenia, provide certain goals to be followed in this respect. One of them being to improve the feasibility of already applied projects, so to remove certain administrative regulatory burdens for their realization. Then an introduction of a new support scheme. So there is an idea to have certain new forms of incentives introduced to actually separate procedure into a simplified procedure for even smaller production units, and then also a certain transition to non-refundable grants for renewable technologies. And also another topic is also the investment subsidies to additionally encourage energy production from renewable energy sources. There's also an idea of having subsidies introduced to encourage energy production to promote investments in certain new promising technologies, which are at this point not yet viable, but appear to be very promising in the near future. One of the important changes, which the Slovenia would be trying to implement, is also a wide scheme to promote self-supply of renewable electricity. So additionally, removing certain administrative obstacles and providing certain fiscal tax incentives in relation to these investments. Another point which I already mentioned is, in order to facilitate wind farms to be finally start developing in Slovenia, there's a envisaged change in regulation on noise pollution, so regulating the limit values and also the distance of wind farms to the closest protected buildings, and also to better determine conditions and restrictions which need to be taken account when placing wind turbines. The last topic I wanted to cover is also more on a corporate investment level. Some of you probably know Slovenia being one of the countries which introduced a FDI screening regime, so foreign direct investment. This is something that we've seen from the clients who are investing in Slovenia not to be that much aware of. It's a new requirement. if the investment comes to a certain risk factor areas, of which energy, even if renewable, could be, then the government needs to approve such an investment if it exceeds 10% in a company, or if it concerns an establishment of a company, as well if it concerns the purchase of real estate. So an additional procedure to actually take into account when trying to implement a project in Slovenia, also from in respect of renewable sources. Thank you very much. Back to you, Brian.
Thanks, Clement. Yeah, I'm glad you touched on the FDI at the end there, because I know that's a common concern in a number of our jurisdictions, including Romania, which recently overhauled the FDI law to make it a bit more, more robust than it has been in the past. But I'm going to shift us into a new region, what we've called Southeastern Europe here, and we're going to be hearing from, and thank you again, Clement, for your presentation on Slovenia. We'll be hearing now from Hungary. Laszlo Kenyeres and Adam Lukanits will be presenting on developments in the last couple of years and the anticipation for the future in the Hungarian renewables market. So I'll turn it over to you two gentlemen.
Many thanks. My name is Adam Lukanits, and I work in the Energy PG of the Budapest office for like 5 years now. And we have also Laszlo Kenyeres here, who is the head of our Energy PG department. And we will be presenting, I would not say all of those that have been implemented in the RES guide, because I believe this kind of deep diving would not be feasible right now, but rather to focus on the most recent developments and the most important trends that will shape our near future on the Hungarian PV market. And I believe we have an additional slide with some further information. So if we can just, thank you. So first of all, it is a question how the future of the support schemes or the support systems will look like in Hungary. As a general trend, we can say that the numbers and statistics show that there is an increasing shift from state subsidies to the free market sale of electricity. On the one hand, the feed-in tariff system that provides mandatory offtake of the electricity for a fixed price does not accept new entries since late 2017. And on the other hand, the premium system, or the so-called METAR system, that is supposed to take over the place of the feed-in tariff system, resulted in mixed success. At the beginning, developers were enthusiastic on the Hungarian market, but this enthusiasm and this trend seemed to slow down after the third and the fourth round of the tender, and the fifth and the sixth round was even less popular, and especially the fifth round, which was a very limited scope for us, a few selected number of participants. But anyhow, the high market prices that are available on the Hungarian market have also dictated that a more sophisticated consideration should be vested in the free market sales of electricity and corresponding financing without state support, for example, by using long-term power purchase agreements. Simultaneously, more and more companies have started to opt out from the already granted state subsidies in Hungary and to leave the subsidy systems. However, this possibility has been terminated in the recent weeks. It was a long procedure with gradual steps. At first, this possibility to leave the support schemes was just simply limited, but at the end, it was completely abolished by the Hungarian government. And for now, it is not. We can say that it is not possible to leave the support systems for power producers. On a separate note, as discussed earlier, the long-term power purchase agreements, or PPAs, are becoming increasingly popular in Hungary. The process is still in its very early stages, and the developers and the consumers are only getting familiar with this concept of risk management. But we can say that they are getting more and more open about this structure. And in our view, those who are at the forefront of this trend are going to have a big advantage in the Hungarian market in the coming years. Anyhow, it has also need to be stated that the tax burdens, and most importantly, the well-known 31% Robin Hood tax, is still existing in the Hungarian market. And it is a major hurdle and a major obstacle for projects without having any state subsidies, and developers are very aware of this tax. We just wanted to have it here as well. That although there's a trend towards free market, this 31% Robin Hood tax is still in its way. The other major topic that we wanted to raise is the phasing out of the grid connection reforms, because this grid connection procedure in Hungary has undergone significant changes in the past, especially in the past year. As the transmission and distribution networks have not been developed in the pace that was expected. So as some kind of result, the ever-increasing demand for connections has started to pose a serious threat to grid security and system stability. Therefore, the legislator has introduced a new grid connection procedure for the allocation of available free capacities. And those who want to use these capacities need to go through a tendering procedure and pay a number of cash deposits. However, even after this, it is not guaranteed that they will be granted with grid access. There is also so-called individual procedure available for the developers, but in this case, the developer has to pay for the cost of the grid development that is necessary to deliver the required grid connection capacities. Moreover, there is also a new limitation that the system operator can set, which is the absolute maximum of weather-dependent generation capacity to be connected to the system in order not to jeopardize the system security. And renewable producers now have to take active part in system stability supply by, for example, being capable of centrally organized curtailments or by providing AFRR services. Overall, with the view to that, the grid operators communicated there is zero available free capacities right now in the Hungarian system, and the next publication is expected to come no earlier than November. We are expecting that the individual procedure will gain ground, although it will obviously raise the developer's cost during the project. And it is also clear that the Hungarian government wishes to grant significant amounts of money and state supports for the development on the grid through various funds, and some smart solutions such as electricity storage are also getting more and more popular in Hungary. So overall, this temporary phase of grid connection scarcity might change on the long run. However, and this is very important, it is unclear how this development of the system will look like. There is not much predictability and clarity in this regard. And certainly the market stakeholders are urging the system operator and also the legislator to give some kind of transparency and predictability to these plans. As a third topic, we wanted to highlight some important aspects of the brand new and previously and recently implemented extra profit taxes of windfall taxes that will certainly affect the spread of PV investments in Hungary, because in part these windfall taxes need to be paid by renewables producers, especially those who decided to leave the support systems in the past while it was possible. The tax rate is pretty high. This is 65%. That has to be calculated based on the profit that these subsidized producers can make by selling their electricity on the free market. And it is important that not just those need to pay these taxes that decided to leave the system, but also those who just simply failed to conclude the necessary agreements with the system operator for the settlement of the state subsidies. So not just the leaving of the system is penalized, but also the not entering into the system behavior of these market participants. So all in all, given that it is no longer possible to leave the system, and there is also a pretty high tax burden for the other scenarios, we can simply say that those that have been granted with state subsidy will just simply remain in the subsidy systems for the near future. And lastly, we just wanted to mention that this new special tax is calculated on the basis of the electricity that is injected into the system. And so long as there is no electricity injection into the system, there is no tax. This is pretty obvious. So we are expecting that the on-site projects will become more and more popular in Hungary, and especially the rooftop projects. And we are also expecting that the consumer-centered PPAs are going to take over the place in this new rush for PPAs instead of the developer incentivized PPA conclusion procedures. And I believe pretty much that's all that we wanted to just highlight here. Thank you.
Just let me quickly also welcome everyone at the webinar. It's a great opportunity to actually talk to our clients, future and past. As Adam has obviously and in depth explained the latest developments of the market, I would not add too much on it. We are here for, of course, the Q&A session, should you have any additional questions for us. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much, Adam and Laszlo, for this overview of the recent developments in Hungary. Now we're going to shift a bit further south to Bulgaria, to my partner Radoslav Nikov, who will be presenting this current situation with the renewables market there in Bulgaria.
Hi, Brian. Thank you very much for the floor. Do you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we hear you. We don't see you, but we hear you. There you are. We see you now. Thanks, Rado.
Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to present today and once again to share our experience from the highlights from the Bulgarian renewable market. It has been 2 years since we last updated the renewables guide, and quite a lot has happened. For those who don't know me, I'm Radoslav Nikov, and I'm partner at Wolf Theiss Sofia office and run the energy and renewables practices. I have more than 21 years of experience and practice in the energy sector in Bulgaria. And actually, the first 9 years I spent in the industry, initially at the nuclear power plant of Kozloduy as head of in-house legal counsel, and then regulatory management at E.ON Group. And this really gave me the opportunity to have the first wave of renewable energies connection to the grid in 2008, 2010. With the team of Wolf Theiss Sofia, we are supporting clients, investors, developers, and financial institutions for more than 11 years. And we have been part of almost every major renewable project in Bulgaria. We are really happy to face a second wave of investments in Bulgaria and development of renewables. After the first one, that was back in 2008, 2012, as I mentioned. But to start, Bulgaria has fulfilled its first target of 16% out of end energy consumption with the 2020 horizon under the 2009-28 Renewable Directive. Now, the new target against the 2030 target and horizon is set at 27%. With a possibility for extension and review in year 2025, and the target would reach 33%. So depending on the decommissioning of the currently operating coal-fired power plants, this may vary in the range of between 2 to 5 or even 6 gigawatt of installed capacity of new renewable projects. I should mention that the hydro potential in Bulgaria is exhausted. So the main two technologies for development are the wind and photovoltaic. Of course, we should not exclude the biomass and the thermal. However, I believe, and my personal impression from my experience is that predominantly PV and wind will be those that master the entire market. Considering that Bulgaria has a solar irradiation of approximately 1,320 to 1,400 hours per year, of course, depending in which part of Bulgaria the project would be located, and the wind potential is around 1,900 to 2,000 hours, and the wind projects are primarily located in the northeast Bulgaria, where Via Pontica is passing, but also on the ridge of Balkan Mountains. I would speculate and assume approximately 2 gigawatts of wind and approximately 4 gigawatts of photovoltaics to be developed in the next period of 7 to 8 years, and of course to the extent the grid capacity allows. I'll come back to this. The Bulgarian National Integrated Plan for Energy and Climate was developed under the regulation 2019-1999 and was sent to European Commission back in 2009, but still not approved. However, in this National Integrated Plan, it is set the indicative installed capacity per technology and the measures how to reach those targets under the different market development scenarios. One should mention that in that plan, there is a potential for in 2025 to introduce a tendering system. However, for the time being, there are no such draft legislation, and we'll see whether this materializes. Also, I should mention the new recovery and sustainability plan that Bulgaria just has defended and was approved by the European Commission. In it, the large number of energy storage projects and green hydrogen technology-based electrolysis projects are envisaged of several thousand gigawatts. I mean, two to be more precise. And this is, of course, is intended to support the balancing of the electricity system once the new renewable projects are implemented. And of course, this will, to the extent the old base load plants are decommissioned, because you know currently there is a discussion that already the coal should not be immediately phased out, considering the situation with Ukraine and the problems with electricity prices, the spikes, etc. So the war in Ukraine is really concerning us all, and of course this will be something to monitor for the future, and obviously it will for sure impact the energy markets. As regards the offshore, because Bulgaria obviously is a sea country with a shore, we actually face interest from UK, US, East, and East investors out of China, even Japan. But the regulation is still not mature in Bulgaria, and the cost for connection to the grid seems rather excessive. So for the time being, it seems unreasonable. But let's see, and we would assume that sooner or later, if the current energy prices are keeping the same levels, one would assume that we may expect such projects to materialize. So the targets are quite challenging, and the institution seems to be quite engaged. I mean, the government is really keen to implement new measures and to realize most of the targets, and in the horizon 2030. What we are seeing currently in the market, well, it's we see large international investors like established developers or operational renewable companies out of Denmark, Austria, Spain, Germany, even China. But we also see and provide services to local large industrial groups, which are diversifying their portfolio and operations, and already look outside Bulgaria. And locally, they try to improve their footprint in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of consumption of own production, and also trying to be competitive compared to the local but also international companies for their production. We also see serious investors from an interest from financing financial banks and financial institutions. But also we see private equity funds and venture capital companies interested in investing in the market. So the variety is really big, and we are very, very happy that currently there is a boom. And in a nutshell, the market is really dynamic, and we have the pleasure to be involved in almost every large project that currently is going on, advising on due diligences as part of M&A transactions, supporting lenders for financing of projects of all kinds. For example, last year we were successful together with the Austrian office to materialize the first and only so far bond issue in Bulgaria for acquisition of our operational PV park. But also we advise investors in the EPC and O&M negotiations and execution of contracts, which is very interesting because sometimes they use local knowledge, sometimes they would like, because of the financing, they would like to see a more Western type of EPC contracts. But we need to support them in aligning and adjusting to the local specifics of the Bulgarian construction and regulatory laws. The most challenging obstacles is for the projects and the developers is to ensure sufficient land that is properly permitted, and as there are certain limitations, for example, for the agricultural land, it is really important those companies to get advisors at the very beginning so that they don't enter into a vicious circle that they buy land and then simply become owners of land which cannot be permitted and cannot be developed in a proper project. The second obstacles and challenge for the investors is the grid capacity, of course, because in some areas it's already congested and needs to be extended and modernized. The levels of connection is above 5 megawatts is to the transmission network, and below 5 megawatts of installed capacity is to the distribution network. Interestingly enough, the distribution companies have to coordinate with the TSO, the operator of the transmission system. And in this case, sometimes even though the distribution grid has sufficient capacity, we are facing projects where the transmission system operator is not coordinating those projects, and this could cause delays or at least increased cost for the investors. So, of course,
sorry, if you can wrap
sure.
it up, Cognizant, we're going into the next time block here. So
absolutely. And the third aspect is the corporate PPAs. And when I mention corporate PPAs, I should mention that in 2019, 2020, there was a change in the Energy Act, and I would like to just to finalize my overview with the three incentives that are currently available for the new projects. This is all the producers basically have to sell their produced electricity through the IBEX, which is the Bulgarian Power Exchange. However, for projects that are commissioned after October 2020, there is an exemption, and they could conclude OTC transactions, so outside the IBEX platforms. Also, the OTC transactions are possible between renewable producers and licensed traders or end consumers. And the end consumers and traders are basically exempt from a payment of the obligations towards society fee, which is annually regulated, while the producers are exempted from 5% tax on revenues, which is monthly installment to the State Energy Security Fund. So we very much look forward to the new developments in the regulation related to the aggregators and transposition of the directives from the clean energy package. So introduction of prosumers, aggregators, regional operation centers, etc. And of course, I should mention that please strike any question that you may have. We'll be happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Rado. We're going to shift now to Romania, and just I've got the honor of introducing my colleague Adina. Before she gets in, I just want to quickly comment that the experience in Romania is very similar to what Radoslav mentioned for Bulgaria, in the sense that we've had the honor to be involved in many of the significant projects in the first decade, if you can call it that, after 2009. So from 2010 to 2020, we did see a downturn after the suspension of the support scheme with the tradable green certificates in 2016. But now we're seeing a sort of resurrection, if you will. Interestingly, a lot more projects that are focused on solar PV, whereas in the past, the large projects were primarily in wind. Adina, maybe you can talk to some of the issues that we're seeing in Romania, in particular with respect to the legislation and maybe developments in the industry sector generally.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian, for the presentation. So my name is Adina Aurel. I'm senior lawyer in the energy department in Wolf Theiss Bucharest office. I am working on energy and especially on renewable energy since 2007, when the first projects in wind energy were implemented here in Romania. So I have a quite extensive experience, which gave me the opportunity to have a general overview over the market and over the investments in renewable sector in general. So as already Brian shared with you, the new renewable energy targets in Romania have sparked the interest of the renewable energy investors. So the change in the energy and gas law in Romania at the end of last year regarding the possibility to enter into PPAs outside the energy platforms managed by OPCOM has increased, of course, the investor interest in this future area. The market participants are keen to contact the energy suppliers. We see this on the market. So also from the energy supplier side, we see a big interest to enter into these contracts. So both parties are very keen to conclude such PPAs outside the OPCOM markets, and we are working for both energy suppliers and for both renewable energy producers which enter in these agreements. We expect a new support scheme for renewable and clean energy based on contracts for difference to give a greater impulse to these projects in Romania. Of course, you have, let's say, a basic information about this contracts for difference support scheme in our renewable energy guideline, which was prepared for Romania. So if you have further questions based on those basic information, please share with us, and we will be happy to help you to get, let's say, a general overview of the support scheme. The support scheme is going to be implemented from our information starting with September this year. I mean, will be in place a law which will describe extensively how will be the support scheme applicable in Romania for all the renewable energy producers and for the nuclear producers, because this scheme is also intended to be used by the nuclear producers here in Romania. In the Romanian parliament, we have the offshore wind law for the setting of wind turbines in the Black Sea. And we believe that this law will be adopted in the near future after the Romanian state will adopt another secondary legislation regarding the Romanian shore. The Romanian authorities are working on this topic with the World Bank as a consultant to have a stable and predictable legislative framework for investment in the offshore wind sector in the Black Sea. We have also studies showing that the potential is great. In fact, Dobroja, as you know, some of the investors which are already here in Romania know Dobroja for its wind potential, and this geographical area has attracted so far most of the wind projects in the first wave of renewable investments in Romania. So it is natural to continue, and we want to be the first country to implement offshore wind projects in the Black Sea, of course, together with Bulgaria. For the energy sector, we have also from the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, which is also implemented here in Romania, more than 1.5 billion euros funds available for investments. On 31 March this year, we launched the call for the projects worth for 460 million euro. Investors can submit the projects to the Energy Ministry and they can apply for funding. Romania's intentions are to finance over 950 megawatts in renewable energy from these available funds. 450 megawatts in wind and 400 megawatts in photovoltaic panels. In October, Romania will launch the Modernization Fund, which is about 1.4 billion euros per year. So very important financial resource for the investors which are interested in accessing these European funds. The funds are allocated through these modernization funds, which is intended to finance investments in these sectors, renewable energy sources, for example, renewable energy sources in the electricity sector, but also renewable energy sources in the heating and cooling sector. Energy storage, including research, development, innovation, energy infrastructure, and here we can say investments in electricity transmission and distribution grids, natural gas transmission and distribution networks and natural gas storage, district heating networks, high efficiency cogeneration, new electricity generation capacities to replace coal and balance the grid. Nuclear energy, including research, innovation and development, production and use of green hydrogen, energy efficiency in the industrial installation included in the EU ATC. Biofuel production also is an area of interest for Romania. So the Ministry of Energy in Romania will forward these investment proposals, which will be submitted by the investors to the European Investment Bank, and the Investment Committee will indicate the order of priority established by the Supervisory Committee for the evaluation of priority investments proposal and the order of priority for the evaluation of non-priority investments proposal. Yeah, if the investment proposal concerns a multi-annual scheme, it shall be specified the amount requested and the first tranche for the multi-annual scheme. After the European Commission decides on the first tranche of a multi-annual scheme, if a further tranche is required, our Ministry of Energy will submit a new application specifying the amount to be paid and containing the necessary updated information which has to be submitted by the investors. Also, our Energy Ministry will conclude the financing contracts with the beneficiaries. Will finance investments approved for the support from the Modernization Fund on the basis of financing contracts concluded with the beneficiary of investments. So, as you see from this information, the Ministry of Energy will play an important role in these investments. Also, our ministry will monitor and control the investments after these will be implemented in Romania, following the European rules which will be applicable for such funding investments. So, also we can say that to came in the help of the renewable energy investors in Romania, there are new amendments which are being intended to be done to the grid connection regulation. Our national regulatory authority discuss right now with the market participants new amendments to the grid connection regulation. So they are considering also, the grid operator is considering also connection solutions with operational limitations of maximum power that can be discharged into the grid in the situation or operating regimes that have the effect of modifying the values of current flows in the grid, and currently the impossibility for the remaining grid elements and the grid as a whole to operate indefinitely under these conditions. So you can see that as also in other European countries, this situation is also in Austria and in our neighboring countries in Bulgaria. The grid has some limitation in some geographical areas. So therefore, the authorities are taking these measures they are not stopping the projects, they are not stopping the renewable energy investments, but they are coming in the help of the investors with this automatization equipment, which will be required to the investors and which will be implemented in these renewable energy capacities. So the network operator will not have the right to refuse the approval of the connection solution as part of the solution study, but they will have the right to require for the connection some let's say equipment which will be necessary to be implemented by the renewable energy investors. So
sorry, I just wanted to, because we need to wrap up because we're going into the next time block here. So if you just want to conclude in the next 30 seconds.
Yeah, what we can say that from the analysis of these changes in the Romanian legislation, we understand that the Romanian authorities are speeding up the process, of building energy capacities because they have, let's say, limited the duration of building such projects, putting strict deadlines for obtaining a building permit, and for obtaining a building permit for the production place. Therefore, we see an interest of our authorities not to block the network with these renewable energy projects that cannot find financing and that cannot go ahead. It is very clear that for Romania will be applicable the principle first come, first served. So this is, let's say, a signal for the investors in this field in order to keep up and to pay attention to the projects on the market and to go further with the financing in the same time as with the development work, because otherwise I don't think that they will be able to connect to the grid.
Okay. Okay. Thanks very much, Adina. That's very interesting. And I know we're speaking anecdotally, we've seen a huge uptick in activity in the Romanian market. And it sounds like from all of these financing and subsidy developments, we can expect that to continue into the foreseeable future. We're now going to shift to the last region, which is what we call the Eastern region. And we're going to start with our colleague, Sergey in Ukraine. Sergey, if you could please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what's happening over there in Ukraine. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and glad to be opening this panel. My name is Sergey Zhaka. I'm a senior associate with Wolf Theiss Kyiv office and more than 15 years of experience at various major law firms in Ukraine. In my work, I mostly focus on energy and dispute resolution projects. I advise a number of international clients in connection with renewable energy projects in Ukraine, which include construction of facilities, acquisition of greenfield and commissioned projects, various regulatory aspects of operations of such projects, and so on. When it comes to Ukraine, obviously, currently all aspects of operations of renewable energy market are shaped by the war that Russia started against Ukraine on February 24th this year. I will therefore first touch upon the framework in the renewable energy area that was in place before the war started. And then I will briefly summarize how the industry changed over the last 3 years, 3.5 months of war. So let's see how things stood before the war. By the end of 2021, a total of 8.1 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity was officially installed in Ukraine, mostly wind and solar power. The only available incentive scheme at that time was the so-called green tariff, or a special feed-in tariff provided to renewable energy producers under direct power purchase agreements with the state enterprise guaranteed buyer. The guaranteed buyer was set up to purchase all of the electricity generated by the renewable energy producers, which received the green tariff. The average price for this renewable electricity production under the green tariff before the war was approximately 13 to 15 euro cents per kilowatt hour. Even though investments into renewable energy generation have been decreasing over the last couple of years, as no new green tariff was available after the start of 2020, the area still remained lucrative and attractive for investment, and the tariff was much higher than in the rest of Europe. The government made significant efforts to stimulate and encourage the flow of foreign investments into renewable energy projects. For example, VAT exemptions on the import of certain energy equipment were granted, the process of land allocation was simplified, etc. It should be mentioned that the government had run up serious debts before the renewable energy producers over 2020 and 2021, even though it was working successfully to extinguish all that debt in the end of last year and beginning of this year. It was planned that renewable energy auctions will substitute the green tariff as a government support scheme, but this did not happen prior to the start of the war, and no renewable energy auctions have been held so far. The government was about to introduce regulation on electricity storages, which is important for a renewable energy facility since they generate electricity at an unstable rate. And the government was also considering introducing direct PPAs between electricity producers and consumers with a feed-in premium scheme. This would allow producers to sell electricity at market prices without needing to sell all of the output to the guaranteed buyer. All these initiatives are obviously on hold for the time being, at least until the war ends. So let us now look at what happened to the industry after the war started. Well, it is expected that the war will have a really negative impact on the renewable energy industry in Ukraine, with a significant reduction in solar and wind power capacity. Part of the reason is that majority of solar and wind power facilities are located in the south and southeastern parts of Ukraine, the areas currently affected or potentially affected by direct military fighting, not to mention that Russian rockets can reach any part of Ukraine anyway. Many of the facilities have been destroyed or damaged during the military actions. It has also been observed that Russian military forces in many cases deliberately aim its weapons, mostly rockets and shells, to hit renewable power facilities, for instance, solar power plants and wind turbines in most cases. This way, they're obviously trying to destroy infrastructure in various parts of the country. And it's not only that. Because of the war, electricity demand in Ukraine dropped by about 30 to 40%, including demand for electricity from renewable sources. Many of the households and businesses are unable to pay their electricity bills. Moreover, the electricity prices have decreased as well. And the Ukrainian government, unfortunately, is unable to financially support the renewable energy sector through the feed-in tariff in the current conditions. And bulk of the state funds are obviously spent on the military, humanitarian, and various social purposes. State support under the Renewable Energy Support Scheme, or the Green Tariff, has been reduced drastically for renewable energy producers. So now electricity producers are eligible for only around 20% of the normal green tariff rate that they would receive before the war started. And the situation has been that way starting from March this year. This all places the renewable energy business in the country in a rather precarious situation, with many of the renewable energy projects struggling to meet the bottom line or recoup investment. It is therefore not surprising that many of the operators are currently working with their financing banks on restructuring their obligations and financing milestones. There have been various initiatives to help the Ukrainian renewable energy players survive the current conditions. Certain foreign countries, for instance, Denmark, offered financial assistance to keep various solar power projects in Ukraine afloat for the duration of the war. Similar messages were heard from various investment institutions and international banks. If this or any other support arrangements will not fly, it is hard really to estimate how many of the renewable power projects will survive in the long run, especially if the war will continue for a longer period of time. All in all, the fate and prospects of the renewable energy projects currently hang in balance, so to say, and will of course depend on how the conflict with Russia further develops, and most importantly, on what terms it will be resolved. Obviously, the sooner the war ends, the better are the prospects for the renewable energy producers. As we see it, due to the physical and economic devastation caused by Russia and Ukraine, even after the war ends, the existing and new energy producers will for some time require support from foreign and particularly EU funds for or institutions to bring them and the renewable energy field in Ukraine at large back to life. We, however, estimate that this scenario could be a very likely one in case Ukraine is awarded the EU candidate country status later this month. But also unexpectedly, there are good news too coming out of this horrible conflict with Russia. Over the last 3 months, Ukraine considerably reduced its carbon emissions and is way ahead of schedule on emissions reduction under the 2019 Paris Climate Agreement. This is, of course, nothing to be happy about in the current situation. So many thanks for your attention, and I will be happy to address any questions regarding the Ukrainian renewable energy sector, either directly during this webinar or via email.
Thank you, Sergey. And obviously, tragic developments in Ukraine and very sobering assessment. And we all appreciate what you must have been going through over the last several months since this war started. And we appreciate you taking the time and dedication, notwithstanding the circumstances, to contribute to the guide and to be here with us today. So thank you for that. And thank you for your information about the current situation in Ukraine. I'm going to shift now to Poland on the border of Ukraine to Przemek, my partner in the Warsaw office, who will be presenting an overview of the current situation with the renewable sector in Poland. Przemek, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brian. Good afternoon. My name is Przemek Kozduj, and I'm heading banking and finance team in Warsaw. You're right. This is no mistake. I'm just covering a colleague of mine, Konrad Kosicki, who is heading our energy team in Warsaw. We do a lot advising both investors and banks in respect to the renewables in Warsaw. So my perspective based on the finances, that already a couple of years ago, if we were discussing renewables within banking team, usually it was connected with restructuring. Nowadays, renewables is one of the class of the assets that the banks are really looking forward to finance. And we have in Poland broad variety of the financing players that would really be happy to finance such projects. Not just Polish banks, but also German, Austrian, and international banks like European Investment Bank and EBRD. But I expect that you would like to listen more about what's happening in the energy sector as it is, and this is actually happening a lot. There's a couple of years ago we have a situation where the growth of wind farms have been stopped by so-called 10H rule, which only allows to build the new wind farms in the areas where there's less than 10 times the height of the windmills to the residential areas. And there's just something like 2% of the area of Poland where actually such wind farms can be installed. So the environment, the developers and the investors in Poland are now in negotiations with the government. The bill is already in parliament to remove this 10H rule or to somehow soften it to make it more available. The other very important development is that we have a separate offshore act concerning offshore wind farms. And so there are some plans that already in 2024 we will have some first Polish offshore farms producing electricity to the grid. Currently, we have an auction scheme in Poland, which is based on the Renewables Act adopted already in 2015. This auction-based support scheme is supported by European Commission already in 2017. In November last year, the European Commission approved the prolongation of the existing scheme until 2027. The auction-based support scheme is based on the concept of contracts for difference. The support is awarded by the auctions organized by the regulator and applies. It allows the entities to supply the amount of renewable electricity at the lowest price. Auctions are being held electronically via web platform. There is no minimum bidding price, but there is a maximum price for 1 megawatts, which can be offered in a given year, which is so-called reference price. There are so-called different technology baskets for various sources of such electricity, and there are also it depends on the volumes and the sources of energy. In order to participate in the actions, the RES installations must pre-qualify. In order to pass pre-qualification, the RES project must achieve the ready-to-build stage, which means it has to obtain the final building permit and have secured grid connection. The certificate of qualification is valid for 12 months only. Bidders have a deadline to commence electricity generation. This differs depending on the source. So, for instance, for the solar installations, this is 24 months. For onshore wind installation, this is 33 months, and 42 months for other generation technologies. These periods can be extended by the regulator, but not more than by another 12 months. If the delay in starting the power generation is caused by pandemics, especially if there are delays in deliveries of equipment. Settlements. The facilities above 500 kilowatts can sell renewable electricity on the market. They are entitled to apply for a refund of the difference between the amount of the electricity sold by them in the market in the preceding months and multiplied by the stock market price and the price which is offered in the auction. Such settlements are taken on the monthly basis. The price which is selected in the auction is annually adjusted by the inflation rate, which has been relevant in the recent months when the inflation rate has really become significant. If the value of the electricity which is sold on the market is higher than the value based on the price offered in the auction, no support is paid, and the difference is deducted from the amount of support payment in the next settlement period. And if at the end of the entire support period such a difference is not yet settled, the outstanding amount will be paid by the electricity producer to the settlement manager. In general, the term of support in the auction system is 15 years. However, the support may in no case last for longer than 2047. The meeting of the obligations to produce the declared volume of electricity by a given producer must be verified by the regulator in 3 years intervals. Within 3 years of settlement period, the producers are obliged to produce at least 85% of the electricity volume declared at the auctions. Otherwise, it may be obliged to pay a fine the amount of which may depend on the volume of the shortfall. During the 5 years of operation of the auction system, from 2016 to 2020, the regulator has granted total support covering more than 209 terawatt-hours of electricity, which corresponds to approximately 11 billion euro, which has been paid to the green energy generators for the period of 15 years. In June 2021, 37 terawatt-hours have been contracted for more than 8.5 billion zlotys. And the recent auctions also show that the system starts to work. And at the moment, we see that there's a lot of appetite for the smaller size projects, which give very attractive prices at the market. So there's also a lot of appetite for the biogas projects, which have also become very popular. There are some political tensions also promoting those among the farmers. There's also a huge change about Polish prosumers. Until 1st of April, there was a very attractive system for the Polish prosumers to join the system. The system has been changed on 1st of April 2022. Now it's less preferential for the prosumers to join the grid, but still bearing in mind the inflation rate and growing energy prices, I believe this is going also to play a significant role in the future on the market. Should you have any questions, I think we will try to answer them by email. And thank you very much for your attention. Over to Brian.
Przemek, thank you very much, and I really appreciate you stepping up and covering Poland. That was a very useful overview, and also acknowledge your interesting perspective as a banking partner to talk about how you're seeing more activity now in the renewable sector in Poland on the financing side as well. We're going to shift now, last but certainly by no means least, to our colleagues in the Slovak Republic. I'm going to ask Dalibor and Josef to introduce themselves and to wrap up with their presentation. Before they begin, just a couple of administrative notes. We will have a brief period of time, depending on how, you can tell we're slightly over, 6 minutes over actually, but depending on how much time we may have, we could perhaps field 1 or 2 questions. And then I'm going to have my colleague Alexander, who was organizing this event, to say a few words about some organizational follow-up, and we'll look to conclude this on the half hour. So thank you all. I'm going to turn it over now to Dalibor and Josef.
Thank you very much, Brian. Hello, everyone. My name is Josef Virčík. I'm an associate in Wolf Theiss Bratislava, and I'm a member of employment as well as energy team in our office. My colleague, Dalibor Palatický, who will be also presenting with me, is an associate at Wolf Theiss and is a member of the corporate data protection and energy teams in Bratislava. He regularly advises on the transactions related to the regulatory aspects associated with the trading of natural gas at the various hubs and on matters of regulatory and reporting obligations associated with electricity and gas trading activities in Slovakia. We would like to briefly update you on some of the legislative changes and trends in renewable energy in Slovakia. Due to time constraints, we will only mention the most important ones. So, as part of our RES guide, we highlighted a couple of changes that were implemented in the Slovak jurisdiction in terms of legislative changes over the last 2 years. Among other changes, such as adoption of the new act on major investments and preparation of some complex amendments which were initiated at the end of the last year. We consider as the most significant one the amendment to the Critical Infrastructure Act. This amendment, which came into force as of 1st of March 2021, implemented the first FDI, foreign direct investment screening, to the Slovak law. The implemented version of the FDI screening we consider it as a rather simplified one. It applies to entities based on two cumulative conditions. If those are triggered, it applies. The entity must, first of all, operate in the sector that falls within the competence of the Ministry of Economy. This list that is attached to the law entails mining, gas, petroleum, pharmaceutical, and other industries. And despite the fact that it is a pretty wide range of sectors falling within the competence of the ministry, the FDI screening applicability is severely limited by the second mandatory conditions, which must be fulfilled at the same time, which is that it must be also listed as an element of critical infrastructure by the Ministry of Economy. This second list of entities maintained by the Ministry of Economy is not publicly available. However, each entity is informed by the ministry about its designation as an element of critical infrastructure. So every entity should know whether it is on the list or not. Based on unofficial information from media, there is only a couple of dozen entities which are listed on this list. So in reality, the FDI screening process is quite unlikely to be triggered most of the times now. Nonetheless, the FDI screening mechanism applies ex lege to both share deals as well as asset deals. And if it is triggered, the transaction is subject to reporting to the Ministry of Economy. And second of all, approval of the transaction by the Slovak government must be obtained. Based on our experience with the new FDI screening process, the clients mostly request verification whether the target is subject to FDI screening or not. For this purpose, we try and we assess the business activities of the target company and compare it with the list of industries that falls within the competence of the ministry. If we establish that this first condition is fulfilled and that the target operates in the listed sector, the second condition is subject to verification, for example, in the course of due diligence process. However, since the list of entities, as I mentioned earlier, is not publicly available, it is not possible to verify with 100% certainty whether the FDI screening process applies to respective entity or not. Of course, unless the entity provides us with the confirmation that the ministry put them on the respective list. Currently, the Ministry of Economy is also working on a separate piece of legislation. It is called the Foreign Investment Screening Act, and it aims to implement more comprehensive FDI screening to the Slovak legislation. It is inspired by the modern FDI screening processes that were implemented across European countries. So we believe it might eliminate some deficiencies of the current legislation, for example, the not public nature of the list of entities. My colleague Dalibor will now briefly update you on the current trends in renewable energy. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph. As you may notice, the last 2 years have rocked the energy industry in Slovakia. First, the pandemic significantly reduced consumption, but at the first sign of economic recovery, prices of all energy commodities shot to unprecedented heights. The final blow was the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which I believe woke up not only Slovakia, but also the whole world. The war in Ukraine shows us that the shift away from fossil fuels is not only environmental, but also a security and strategic interest of Slovakia. As to the recent trends related to renewables in Slovakia, I would start with the first one, which refers to the state subsidy. In particular, the Ministry of Economy has announced the first call for the construction of new renewable energy sources from the Recovery and Resilience Plan. The ministry will support basically a project with a total amount of 18 million euros, regardless technology. The main criterion in the assessment will be the lowest price of the energy production. The goal is to increase the share of the electricity produced from the renewable sources by at least another 120 megawatts by 2026. The second currently discussed trend in Slovakia is geothermal energy. Efforts to lower dependence on Russian energy are speeding up local geothermal projects in Slovakia that had been gaining traction before the invasion of Ukraine itself. The pilot project of a geothermal power plant in the central Slovak town, which is called Čiar nad Hronom, recently received investment from one of the main electricity distributors in the country, owned partially by the state and partially by the Czech billionaire Daniel Křetínský. Geothermal is the last of all renewable energy sources not represented in the energy mix of domestic electricity production in Slovakia, despite experts pointing to its vast potential. Currently, geothermal is only used in a small part of eastern Slovakia for heating. Geothermal potential of Slovakia is estimated at approximately 5,500 megawatts. If fully exploited, Slovakia could supply hundreds of thousands of households with the heat and to lesser extent the electricity. Last but not least, my third chosen trend will be related to biomethane, which can replace part of the natural gas consumption in Slovakia. According to the Slovak Gas and Oil Association, these steps means the Slovak gas industry is getting greener. The basic material used to produce biogas is chicken manure and cow dung and various biodegradable waste, and subsequently this biogas is then turned into biomethane. Generally, biomethane has the same features as natural gas, which means it can be used in the gas pipeline system and delivered to the end customers. Currently, around 100 biogas stations are in operation in Slovakia. The Ministry of Economy is currently working on the subsidy schemes to build new capacities for the production of biogas and biomethane, and for the modification of existing biogas stations so that they would be able to produce biomethane. In any event, Slovakia has potential to produce from 400 to 500 million cubic meters of biomethane a year, which equals 10% of the current consumption of natural gas. If natural gas is replaced by biomethane, the energy security of Slovakia increases, as we would not have to import such large amounts of natural gas. Thank you.
Thanks, Dalibor, and thanks, Josef, both for that interesting overview of the current developments and trends in the Slovak market. This will end the formal presentations, and I'm aware now that we were slightly over. I wanted to take one moment to thank two individuals who really helped to not only put this webinar together, but also with the guide, and that's Akbar Saryev and Alexander Miklots. And Alexander is actually going to say a few words just to kind of conclude here logistically what will happen next in terms of getting follow-up emails to all the participants. But Alex, could you perhaps speak to the folks as to what will happen, and then we'll do the formal closing.
Sure, absolutely. So thank you for having me, Brian. It was a pleasure to help to organize the webinar. Actually, what we are going to do, we would like to create a thank you email to everybody who has attended today. We will include the PowerPoint presentation with all the contact details. We will share a webinar recording within the thank you email, and we will also upload the webinar recording on our website as well as on our social media channels. Regarding the questions you might have asked in the chat box, we will be totally happy to get back to you as soon as possible. And
I think importantly, we'll also embed a link to the guide, which we've heard so much about here today.
Thanks so much for mentioning. Yes.
Just so the participants know, we have a limited number of print versions, but those are available if you meet with our colleagues in any of the Wolf Theiss offices. But certainly, given the wonders of technology, we can send you a downloadable link, a PDF link to the guide, which has all of the information that was referenced from sort of a helicopter view here today. This is a much more deeper analysis of some of the points that were flagged in the presentations today. So again, I want to thank all of my colleagues who contributed to the Renewable Energy Guide and who took the time to speak here today. Thank you very much. I would encourage, as Alex said, any questions you have, you can send those to us by email. You'll have those contact details tomorrow. And certainly if you have any information that you would need, if we can provide that to you regarding any of the countries, the renewable energy situation in any of the countries we featured here today, we'd be happy to provide that information to you. I think in summary, we can say it's a very dynamic market. These days, we've seen a real renaissance, if you will, with the introduction of the new targets established by the European Green Deal. And as we heard, tragically, with the events in Ukraine, these are only underscoring and emphasizing the need for all of the countries in our region to wean themselves off Russian oil and gas and create some new solutions. I thought from what Slovakia was saying in our last presentation, very innovative solutions, including biomethane, geothermal, other than just the traditional, let's say, wind, solar, and hydro, and nuclear, I should add, is also another area where we're seeing a renaissance in some of our countries, certainly in Romania and others. So thank you all to all the participants. We look forward to hearing from you. If you have need of legal assistance in any of the countries that we profiled here today, if you have need of assistance on matters involving renewable energy or projects in which you may be involved or interested, we also have a lot of information on projects that are available in our markets. So we know the markets commercially, although it's not our core area. We work with a number of brokers and developers, and as you heard from some of our speakers, we're doing all aspects, including EPC, O&M, M&A transactions, development, financing, really the spectrum, regulatory. So we're very happy to assist you and your clients and your contacts with whatever their legal needs may be in our market. So with that, I'd like to formally conclude the presentation, the webinar here today, and we thank you again for your participation and look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thank you all very much, and thank you to Alex and to all the speakers, and thank you all to the participants, and have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.